Friends, I know it's played out, but liking, commenting, subscribing really helps with the algorithm. So if you enjoy the new content, click those buttons for me, please.
Predicting sort of political change is a bit like predicting the weather 15 years out, but if you had to predict what the American political climate is going to be like should Trump lose, what do you think you would come up with?
If he loses?
If he loses, how does the Republican Party and how does the electorate adapt to that new space?
This is a good question. I really believe that MAGA is not going anywhere. Right.
Oh, no. No, definitely not.
I think there are some people, especially in the Democratic Party, who are kind of think of it as a cult of personality and kind of if you cut off the head, the rest of it will go away.
Right.
But, I mean, especially on some of the really hot topic issues like immigration, when you look back at 2016, I mean, some of the read was, oh, Trump is saying these things that are so out of pocket. But what he was actually doing was speaking to what the desires of the Republican base had wanted for generations, and no one had done it before.
A sort of latent nativism.
Latent nativism or really amplifying the fear, looking at the kind of, I'm somebody who looks at the economic precarity that exists in the United States as being fairly universal, right? Many people experience this, whether it's about debt, whether it's about not making enough wages, whether it's, you're somebody who maybe makes a good income, but your house is underwater. So part of the question is, how do politicians package those experiences and put a framework around them?
Right.
And one of the most powerful things you can do is to say, it's not your fault, it's their fault.
Right.
And the question becomes, well, who's the they? And immigrants are a really, really, really powerful version because they don't have a voice, right? They're not even part of our community usually.
While pushing protectionist policies. I think you're absolutely right. I don't think he does anything originally. I think he takes a look at what people are talking about, how people are feeling, and then targets that with almost surgical precision.
Right. And offers a kind of populist vision, but at least when he was governing, it was sort of a standard conservative policy.
Oh yeah, it was all bull.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
But to your question, like what is the future going to be? So I think MAGA's not going anywhere. The question will be if there can be another kind of like charismatic leader, as they say, to be able to just take it over in the same way. And if there isn't, what that leadership battle will look like, and if there's going to be different kinds of frameworks or different kinds of policies that people find really exciting. So maybe it becomes less about this and more about that.
I feel like MAGA will die with Trump, but I think that there's like a thing that like MAGA, I think it feels to me kind of like an evolution or continuation of what the Tea Party movement was.
100%.
Yeah, so like those populist feelings I don't think will disappear, but I definitely think that Trump is like a special character that was able to capture that. And when I say it was able to capture that, I just mean intuitively, because I don't think this man has thought a single moment of his life about how to present himself politically. I think he lucked into everything. But I think that when he was able to capture that with the type of charisma that he has, I feel like evidence of this is like in this election cycle, I feel like a lot of people were thinking like, okay, well, who's going to step up? Like DeSantis is, he's a really effective leader. He's been a good governor in Florida. Like this is probably going to be. And you got like Vivek, who's kind of got like that Trump populist bend, and then there's Nikki Haley for like the kind of the traditional the neocons who are still there in the background.
Right.
And these people all got handily destroyed.
Yes.
It wasn't even close.
It's going to be someone more like Gates, I think, than any of those three.
Maybe, yeah, it's hard. But the thing is that like Trump works. 51% of Trump's success is his on-stage performance. Personally, I feel like a lot of the lack of success he's experienced lately is because he's actually lost a lot of that. I think it's been the conversion of a positive ethos to a negative ethos, that regardless of how you felt about conservatives, Trump running is like, forget all the policies, the populism, the whatever, the authoritarian messaging, make America great again. It was very positive. He felt like a winner. This is like the apprentice guy, business dude, positive. And after he lost in 2020, it's just been so negative. And that's like really good, I think, for short-term politics powering, but it never lasts that long. And it's kind of like if you listen to Trump talk now, it's like a downer, man. Like before you could listen to it, but he had all these exciting ideas, as stupid as they might have been, like when you analyze them, but it felt like more positive, and it just felt like such a bummer now. And I think that when Trump is gone, I think that populist bend of whatever is rotting the Conservative Party will still be there, but I don't know if the next person who can take over, nobody stepped up that's that charismatic that can do it like Trump does.
Yeah, and so just building on this, I think Well, one, we're already seeing these things about like people leaving the rallies, right? There's reporting that came out the other day of just like, yeah, people are leaving Trump's rallies because they're frustrated that they're starting late. They're not the I'm going to wait for 6 hours no matter what to see the person. So I think there's evidence.
They're so goddamn boring at this point. They're so boring to cover. I can't.
It's hard though because it's not for us, you know. But
I get it. I mean, like he used to be somewhat entertaining before covering politics back in 2016. I watched every single one of his rallies. I couldn't look away.
Yeah.
And now when he speaks, I've heard everything he's had to say literally 1,000 times at this point. He's not saying anything new, and his delivery is just getting less and less
enthusiastic,
and energetic. Yeah, he's phoning it in. It seems like.
Well, and he always had, and this is what I think is the powerful thing about his framework, and really what fuels MAGA is this like clearly articulated sense of grievance that is articulated very clearly, but can be transposed onto lots of different topics. You can't quite nail it down. That has, to your point, this kind of hopefulness behind it, right? We're really upset about how things are. We really think that America is about to be destroyed. We're about to lose everything, but we're going to make it great again, you know? And especially after 2020, a lot of his rhetoric is now, you know, he says things like, I am your retribution. He's kind of really personalized the way that who am I to psychologically, you know?
Sure.
To like,
and then like harping on like the election being stolen for a way, even if he thought it was, just like bringing that up over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And then just like the unhinged, like so many comments, like the immigrants are poisonous to the blood of the nation, and like the dogs and the cats eating, and the TV stuff, and the, it's all crazy. I actually thought when I watched the Biden debate against Trump, I think the biggest issue didn't have to do with his senility or his aging. I thought the biggest issue was that campaign was taking way too big of a policy or fact-based approach. Mm-hmm. And like watching Biden try to rattle off all these facts and figures while Trump was just saying bizarre random shit that's funny to the audience. Yeah. And Kamala did a much better job at, and I was screaming at my computer before. I was like, you gotta say he's got small hands. Like, please just say like he's just one thing. And dude, when she made that comment, rallies, he lost it. It was just hilarious. And I think that I hope that they continue to move in that kind of direction. Like, I think liberals, I wish I could remember the paper. I don't know if this is 2016 or 2020, but I think that liberals finally figured out that there's this myth, in my opinion, and I think in this paper, I wish I could remember what it was, but it argued that like people will say like Americans don't care about, you know, like all these things. They care about like the kitchen table issues and like the bills and the economy. There are a lot of Americans, even poor Americans, that are wholly fired up over things like abortion. And it can be the poorest person ever, but like your stance on trans people or abortion, that might be your singular deciding factor. That's not a thing that only wealthy people will obsess over. That's the thing, like these social issues matter up and down to the entire echelon of society. And
well, this is the classic what's the matter with Kansas, right? Which Thomas Frank wrote this in the early 2000s, which is you have people who we think should be motivated by material concerns, and then they vote for, you know, things that are against their material interests. Mm-hmm. And part of what I think the left broadly is sometimes really bad about is to say, well, those are their interests, right? They might not be material, but they really care a lot about those things. And if we want to kind of engage with them seriously, we can't just say, hey, dummy, you should care about how much money you're making, not about abortion. We need to treat them as somebody who, at least in the first conversation, as somebody who's motivated by that.
Yeah, I get there was a comment that was made earlier, and I'm not here to debate people, I'm just here to like chat, but I actually really disagree with it, and I think that it's a framing issue where people will say something like, well, I mean, what's wrong with Candace? Voters aren't always rational, right? And it's like, you're dead wrong. Voters are very rational. They just care about something that's way different than what you think they care about, right? Like a voter might think, or you might say like, bro, you're voting against your economic interests in A, B, and C or whatever, like for a stance on abortion. This guy would sacrifice some of his paycheck for his opinions on abortion. Like you perceive it as irrational, but what you are actually emoting without realizing it is, this voter doesn't make any sense. But what you're realizing is, this voter has different priorities than I do. And instead of identifying that the priorities are very different, you go, he's not voting in the same way that I would expect him to if he cared about the same things I did, therefore he's irrational. It's like, that's not true at all. And it's important to identify that, I think, when it comes to messaging and fighting on policy. Yeah.
100%. I mean, when you do the deep dive into, well, not how do we want voters to think, but how do Americans actually engage with politics and think about it, it is quite different from the kind of dreams of everyone being a fully informed voter who then rationally looks at the different priorities and puts them in order, and then from that decides, well, which policies do I care about and which parties are the ones who are following them. No, the classic one is get out your wallet, what party are you a part of? Probably because your father was, and that's kind of what you build your identity around. And you might not really think very deeply about politics, not because you're stupid, but just because you've got other stuff to care about.
Yeah, I think like the heritability of your political alliance is like over 75% or something.
I thought it was closer to like 85%. Yeah, it's enormous. Yeah,
that's over 75. Why'd you have to correct me there? I'm just kidding. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, like in political science, we talk about party ID, right? Like your party ID, your partisanship decides all this stuff. And this is the thing that's pretty fascinating with you feel like Trump is just someone who's completely different from any other candidate, but the vast majority of Romney voters voted for Trump, and the vast majority of Obama voters voted for Clinton. Same thing happened in 2020. It's these sort of smaller pockets of people who either opt in or opt out or change their minds or are persuadable. Like that's usually the universe of people we're trying to engage with. But the reason people are political in the first place, just to emphasize your point, is because of some rational way they look at the world. And the question is, well, how do they look at the world? Not how should they look at the world.
Yeah.
If what we want to do is change their minds or like change their votes or something.
What happens when a more and more significant chunk of the electorate is shaping their worldview through an internet-driven lens? I mean, so what happens there?
This is the question. We have to figure out ways to make inroads, right? I'll just, not to get a little too in the academic weeds, but this book came out this spring that like really framed some of how I'm thinking about this. It's called Rust Belt Union Blues, and it's by Theda Skocpol, who's like a famous political scientist, and Numi, I think is her name, came out in the spring. And what they do is they go to Western Pennsylvania, right? It's old Union country. All the people there, they used to be Democrats. They used to be in the unions. And now most of the people there, it's like MAGA country. And so their question was like, well, what changed? Can we figure out in the context of these folks' lives, in the context of their perspectives, like what happened? And they look at all the available poll data, and they find that over these generations, there's not really any movement about views. People don't suddenly think differently about race or about gender or even about policy. The biggest change is that back in the early 1900s, back in like the heyday of the unions, there are all of these progressive and liberal civic institutions that people can join. They've got union halls, they've got Rotary clubs, they've got churches. There are places where people can live their lives and get these different things.
And that's being replaced with Facebook, you mean?
Well, what happens is, at least in this case, those are all gone except for one institution, which are gun clubs. And gun clubs are now the place where people go to hang out with their friends, where people get married, where people go to find work. So
try to presidents.
Yeah, but so maybe not surprisingly, when you take an entire infrastructure and you remove all of the progressive or liberal stuff and you just leave the conservative stuff, people tend to adopt more conservative views. So part of what we need to think about, both in terms of brick and mortar, but also in terms of online, is how do you build those alternative spaces that people can go to, which is, I think, is some of the like most powerful work that you all do, especially in online communities where, and this is something I think the right is so good about. I don't think they necessarily do it as some big plan, but you go into all these spaces that are not ostensibly political. Oh, this is a space about fashion. This is a space about cooking. This is a space about tips on how to decorate your house. And then it's like also fascist. Right. So
I feel like, are those spaces even existing anymore? Because I feel like everything's, like going to the gym is like right wing now. Like I feel like everything is political, like everything has been made political. I don't know if there are any apolitical spaces. Like we're in gaming probably in large part, or I'm sorry, we're in politics probably in large part because of like the whole Gamergate, right? When all the gaming community started to get more political, and you kind of had to have, now if there's like a new game comes out, and there's like a female main character and it's getting bad reviews, now you have to figure out, like, is this game actually bad and that's what's getting bad reviews, or are people just as mad because there's like a woman that's like the lead character, like, you know?
And that's getting worse.
Yeah.
It's getting worse and worse. Now there's online spreadsheets where people have devoted, where you can look up like, is Starfield woke?
That has to be a troll.
No,
I've looked through that spreadsheet. That thing is wild.
Some of it's like it's woke because you can have a mixed race marriage or something. And
it's just like,
oh my god.
Yeah.
It's unhinged. Yeah.
They call Starfield woke, for example.
Yeah.
I think it's literally just because there are interracial relationships and queer people.
Right.
But that's it.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, what are the games that are left? You know, it's very funny.
Right.
But I think part of what I think is so just impressive about what you all do. But what we need more of are having, like, I'm a big infrastructure guy. I mean that not like, I mean, I love a train, but I mean more like, where's the civic infrastructure? Where are the alternatives where people can go when they have these kinds of interests, to be able to have those interests and not have to talk to a trad wife about it, right? Instead, be able to talk to somebody who's going to offer a different kind of political reference. And I think, this is now me talking, I'm not like citing empirical research. I think that like the left and liberals sometimes are less interested in doing that kind of work and are more interested in having the kind of policy conversations or the ideological conversations. Although, no, there are some folks at the Roosevelt Institute who are studying this exactly right now, and this is why I know this, right? And they are saying we are losing on culture because all we do is talk about policy. It's an exaggeration, of course. But how do we build out more of these spaces? Whether it is like the Union Hall in Western Pennsylvania that is on the ground, or places online like your streams, like the Progressive Victory Discord, where people can go and like have a different kind of experience. So that's what I think that's one of the things that needs to happen, I think.
What are you saying, that the place needs to be a physical place instead of it being online, or can it be online?
Yeah, I think all of the above, right? Mm-hmm. But it definitely needs to be online because more and more people spend so much of their life there, right? Yeah. That's where they find community. That's where they find joy. That's where they find belonging.
Yeah.
You know, and if you're somebody who's kind of like new into these online communities and you stumble somewhere and end up in sort of a red pill forum because you're interested in like learning about how to go on dates, it's, you know, we have to continue this work of giving people alternatives and like rescuing them, giving them pathways to do something different.
Well, conversely, what do you see as far as the future of the Democratic Party goes?
I was going to circle back to this, yeah. So I've been talking about this a lot because this is something I did a little talk with Progressive Victory about canvassing the science behind it, and some of the work that
lay it on us. Let's go.
But I'm going to get to this thing about the future, which is Biden wins in 2020, and the thing that I heard from so many people was, thank God, I can finally stop paying attention. Right. I don't have to check the news. I don't have to door knock anymore. I can just like opt out and go back to normal.
You heard this from actual people?
Yeah, this is like people in my life who are, you know, some of them were really involved in the election. Some people were like very afraid about Trump winning another election. So the question that I really have, and I do not have the answer, is what is going to happen if Harris wins? And will some of these sort of nascent institutions and spaces that have been built to kind of collect some of this energy and to onboard people into new ways of thinking, will it be able to continue past the election? Because I'm a firm believer, both personally but empirically, that lots of people, it makes sense, like we're exhausted, right? People are gonna like take a break.
Yeah.
But in December and in January and in February of this first term, there's going to be people who are going to be deeply active in trying to shape policy, deeply active of trying to get whatever the new Congress is, whatever the new administration is, to give them the things that they want. Yeah. And it's usually not people-driven organizations. It's usually not the grassroots. It's usually not regular folks who are members of things. And so every kind of electoral cycle, and this is like now me talking from kind of my movement experience, the question is like, can we get enough folks to stay on board and to recognize that we kind of need a longer-term push than just once every 5 years or once every 2 years? So the answer is I don't know what's going to happen, but that's the worry I have with a Harris victory, that there will be another like, whew, we did it, everybody. See you in 4 years.
Well, you know? on paper, the Biden presidency was the biggest success in my life. I'm 41, and he was. I'm
42.
In terms of like, so like in terms of his policy agenda, what he was able to actually get done. Easily the most successful president of my lifetime. I include Obama. I mean, the ACA was great, but we're talking about like the entire agenda. And people thought he was just like Mr. Magoo. And, you know, like I feel like history will regard him well. I think history will look back on his presidency, especially his decision to step aside, and especially if she wins. I think he's going to go down as a legend. But people were, I picked up on what you sort of touched on. I think a lot of people disengaged with politics after 2020. We had a good midterm, that's true, but there were other forces at play there, the Dobbs decision and whatnot. And that's going to be, I worry about the same thing. If she wins and then we get complacent again and then they have a really good midterm, and then what do we do then? You know?
And there's a mix of like, Biden did some very cool stuff, to me very surprising stuff, that it was able to not just have that sort of type of policy, but also the margins were so close in Congress to be able to push it through. But every time this comes around, I wonder not just the question of would more people being involved have a better sense of what was going on, but what else could we have gotten if there were more people organized on the ground.
Right, yeah.
And if I may take a moment to just criticize the Obama administration.
Okay.
Everyone okay with that?
Sure.
Okay. So
it depends, but yes.
Well, I'll go and then you can, I know this isn't a debate, but you can tell me I'm wrong if you want.
Okay.
So 2008, Obama wins. Hooray. And part of the reason he won is because of Obama for America. This incredible, incredible field program that brought in so many small dollar donations, so many people on these email lists, and so many people who knocked doors. They had millions of folks by the end of it. And there were lots of different community groups, lots of different movement organizations that were all kind of funneling into this. Like 2000, those of us who are old enough, we remember what those days were like. Everyone was excited. This was, we had 8 years of Bush and like these wars. There was suddenly something to get involved in, the hopey, changey thing.
Yeah.
So we got this organization, and they win. And there's a really amazing article about this on the Rolling Stone, and then also one in the New Republic that's sort of like the oral history of what happened to OFA. And what happened was, we had a moment where, could the Obama administration have a social movement? Like a movement of grassroots people who are there ready to kick some ass, right? Maybe they'll kick ass against opponents, maybe they'll kick ass against like Dems who are holdouts on certain policies, but we've never had anything like this before, because usually it's very top down, knock the doors, go home. And now we've got people who are like, yo, I know he just won, but I'm calling up my old rep and saying like, what do I do next? And what the administration decides to do is to get rid of the program. And the reason that they did it were real fears that some of these folks who were more progressive might try to push centrist Democrats on things like the public option in the upcoming healthcare issues. So they completely mothballed it. And to the extent, like, I don't even think we have these email lists anymore of people who were involved. And,
Interesting.
And so that's sort of like sad on one level, and not to push the argument too far, but then when you kind of turn the clock forward to 2010 with the rise of the Tea Party, where suddenly there is a grassroots organized, fueled by corporate interests, base able to sort of rise up and push on the right, and there isn't, we could have had an opportunity to have something to push back.
I don't know if anything could have beat that though. Hindsight's always 2020.
Sure.
You're probably right that disbanding this organization was a mistake, but I don't know if anybody could have beat the rise of the Tea Party movement, because there were two main grievances at the time, and number one was the bank bailouts, which had to be done.
Yeah.
There was just. We averted a global economic catastrophe by bailing out the banks, quite frankly. And number two was the ACA. And it took the ACA some time to become popular.
Yeah.
And they really hammered him on the ACA, and he got clobbered in 2010 because Republicans, as I think you mentioned earlier, or somebody else did, they're so, I don't know if they're necessarily disciplined, but they all sync up and they get together on messaging like right away. And they were so good about hammering Obama on socialism, death panels. Mm-hmm. They're going to make you get rid of your doctor, and who could have had a good midterm performance in the face of all that?
No, 100%. I think it's more that if you imagine the right has this much power with the Tea Party, and we had this much grassroots power with the OFA, and now we're going to go into it like this.
Right.
Even if it had been like this, it might have been.
Yeah, maybe we could have limited those losses.
We could have limited the losses. We could have limited the effects on policy. There's lots of things that were on the Obama administration's agenda that could have led to even more longer-term power, like kind of revitalizing the union movement. That suddenly they were just like off the table, right? Because you lost the majority. So I bring this all up to say that this is a recent and very dramatic and to me like quite sad example of like what happens when either institutionally from actors on the top or folks on the grassroots, when we sort of have an electoral win and then walk away.
Right.
It ends up being, well, I hope the people we elected do what we wanted, and I hope they have enough power to do it. And if they don't, well, maybe we'll just hold it against them,
sure.
Right? As opposed to trying to figure out a way to stay involved, trying to figure out a way to leverage more power. Mm-hmm. And it's tricky, right? People are less interested in an off year. I get it. But that's why I'm trying to just tell everybody, like, don't go away.
Sure.
Don't unsubscribe to whatever your thing is.
That is the big challenge. Yeah. What was your name one more time?
Biko.
Biko, it was really nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you for coming on.
This was fun.
Thanks for the chat.
I appreciate it.